I
Good,
remember.
Sharon. All right.
I remember. Well, thank you for coming tonight for our talk on pilgrimage in Iona. I've learned a lot this week, and I'm excited about hearing Bill's presentation. I'd like to start us off with a prayer. The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
God of the guiding star, the bush that blazes, show us your way. God of the stormy seas, the bread that nourishes, teach us your truth. God of the still small voice, the wind that blows where it chooses, fill us with life. God of the elements, of our inward and outward journeys, set our feet on your road today. May God bless us with a safe journey. May the angels and saints travel with us. May we live this day in justice and joy. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Amen.
So thank you for being here tonight. And why don't we all mute, except for Bill? Don't mute Bill. And we will begin our presentation.
Okay, Sharon, you can start the show. I'm very grateful to Sharon for helping me assemble a PowerPoint and for operating it.
Anytime. Here we go.
All right. The Holy Isle of Iona off Scotland's west coast has long been a destination for pilgrims and students of the Christian faith. As one who's made more than 15 journeys to this place of incomparable natural and spiritual beauty, I'm eager to share with you some of my thoughts about how and why Iona continues to draw me and so many others to return again and again, to refresh our souls and to rekindle our creativity. For part of my presentation, I will draw upon the eloquent words of my friend and fellow pilgrim, the Scottish poet, Kenneth Stephen. More about him later. First, some history of Iona and some of my Iona history, Sharon, I think we can go to the first map, actually. So, you see the British Isles. If you look with, if you squint and look, you can see off the west coast of Scotland, below the big word that says Hebrides, you see the word Mull. And the large island to your right is the Isle of Mull, and there's a little dot between the L's of Mull, and that is Iona. I want you to look where it is and look where Ireland is. That will figure in a minute. It was to this tiny island off Scotland's west coast that the Irish religious man Columba came from Ireland, perhaps exiled, the story goes. The legend is that Columba was ordered to go and to keep going until he reached a place from which he could not see Ireland. And so all over the peninsulas and islands of Western Scotland are the sites where he is said to have stopped only to...
Oh, okay. Wait, let me turn the audio.
Oops. Bill, you're muted. You might have done it.
Now I'm not.
Now you're not.
Okay, let's go to the next map.
Mhm.
get you in a little closer. So you can see Mull, and below it you see Islay. That's where they make whiskey. And they're not very close together, but at least it's not easy to walk from one to the other. All right, so all over the peninsulas and islands of Western Scotland are the sites where Columba is said to have stopped, only to keep going because he could still see Ireland. Anyway, around 563 that year, Columba arrived on the tiny island of Iona, which lies just off the southwest corner of the large, winding, sprawling, beautiful Isle of Mull, itself about an hour's modern ferry ride from the Scottish mainland. Columba founded a monastery which thrived long after him and it became one of the most influential in the British Isles, surviving the ravages of time and of Vikings. On the site of Columba's monastery, Iona Abbey was built around 1200 AD by the Viking Ragnar as a center for Benedictine learning. It fell into decline and ruin during the Reformation. Through centuries of decline, the people of the island, consisting of a few sheep farmers and some fishing families, derived some small income from the significant number of pilgrims and tourists who found their way to Iona in the 18th and 19th century. The emergence of Iona in the modern world began really with the restoration of the medieval abbey in 1938 by the Reverend George MacLeod and his newly formed Iona community. The Iona community, based in Glasgow, has evolved into an international ecumenical organization working for justice and peace. A major component of the community's work is their program of weekly retreats, which take place from around Easter through October on the Isle of Iona. They're for pilgrims, church groups, musicians, scholars. In normal times, things have been a little different during the pandemic. The community's facilities at and around the Abbey can host between 100 and 150 people in a given week. The Scottish Episcopal Church has a retreat center called Bishop's House, which can hold about 30 guests. The Catholic House of Prayer, where I usually stay, can host about 9 people. There are 2 small hotels which survive on the fringes of the high tourist season by hosting small retreat groups for students of nature, writing, religion, and other pursuits. In November of 1999, I was able to use some study funds to make possible a trip to Iona, staying at the Catholic House of Prayer. Since that late in the year, the other retreat centers had reduced to minimal programs with skeleton staff for the winter months. So most of the few people that I saw were members of the small community of permanent island residents, to whom, although I don't know many of them well, I remain devoted. Over the more than 20 years since I first arrived, the people of Iona have bucked the national trend of serious island population decline. Led by an energetic and committed new generation of leaders, the islanders have improved and in a modest way increased housing opportunities and attracted new young families. The island's population, down to almost 100 in the early 2000s, is now up to at least 140. There are babies. They had to build an addition for the primary school, which they had feared losing. They raised the money to build a new town hall for their gatherings and dancing. After that first visit in 1999, it was 3 years before my second visit, then 2 years before my third, and then I was averaging and continued to about 3 trips every 5 years. I know that I'm up to at least 15. A bright example of the new generation is Mary Killen, an artisan silversmith, whose business Austana is installed in a repurposed abandoned livestock shed and thrives year-round thanks to successful website sales. The wife of one of the young sheep farmers, Mary is also active on the island's small but essential fire brigade. Yes, they have an engine and hoses. When asked how the men in the fire brigade took to her joining them, she said, "Oh, they weren't keen on it at all. But I said, look around you. Do you see anyone else stepping up to do it?" So they took me. Arriving in 1999, I scarcely knew more about Iona than the wonderful body of songs created by John Bell and others for the Iona community. And I've never actually stayed at the Abbey or been a full participant in their programs beyond attending their morning and evening prayer services and occasional other events open to all. I have played a couple of their services. What I call my place has turned out to be the Catholic House of Prayer, a beautiful small retreat house run by a warden, where there are no group fixed programs unless a group comes in with its own program. That's where I stayed for my first visit. It's where I've stayed for all but 3 of my visits to Iona. There is a daily morning and evening prayer, and there is coordination with the Iona community services at the Abbey and the Bishop's House services, so that one can always get to 2 of them in the morning or evening, and sometimes all 3. To me, as a liturgy-based person, that is heaven. I go to Iona to recharge. As you know, my Lexington experience is one of multitasking in overdrive. On Iona, I rest, I worship, I read, I write and compose, and I wander the island. With every day's steps, another pilgrimage of discovery and of joyful participation in God in the incomparable natural beauty of the island, rain or shine, peaceful calm or hurricane gale. This pilgrimage has 2 parts, that is to say, my pilgrimage. One is getting there, and the other is being there. First, there is the long journey to get there. So first of all, let's move one more frame ahead, Sharon, please. All right, this is a little fuzzy, but you can see a bigger picture of Mull, the big island, and a little bigger dot of Iona between the Ells of Mull and the end of the Isle of Mull. Okay, we can go on to the next one. All right, you see a few, I think you can read these. So, my trip involves flying to the UK, occasionally direct to Glasgow or Edinburgh, but more often to London Heathrow with another flight to Scotland. From Glasgow, and you can see I put a Glasgow over on the right side of the green mainland. That's about where it is. One takes the train or a bus, or one drives, all of these taking 3 hours, to the port town of Oban on Scotland's west coast. You can see that. And that takes about 3 hours. Then, and Oban is a departure point for many ferries sailing to many of the islands. From Oban, there's an hour trip to a big ferry, on a big ferry to the Grand Isle of Mull, which you see how winding around and how many ins and outs Mull has. Scotland's 2nd largest island after Skye. Okay. So Sharon, if you can go to the next picture. Okay, did we have Oban in there somewhere? Check the next one just in case. They might have been backwards. No, that's all right. Anyway, I had somewhere a picture of the Oban, which is the ferry port. It's just picturesque. As you approach Mull on the big ferry, you are greeted by the picturesque, even in scaffolding, Duart Castle, home of Clan MacLean. And it greets you. On the bus or driving from the ferry at Cranure, which is the ferry port on Mull, one travels for an hour and a half, pretty much, across the southern length of Mull. It's a single track road, so there's a lot of pull off at the little crescents when you meet someone. The southern length of Mull is known as the Ross of Mull. We can go to the next one. The road will pass through mountains, striking mountain wilderness, and will pass beneath Ben Moor. Okay, the next one, Sharon. Ben Moor is the second highest mountain in Scotland. Its second highest peak. And the journey will reach the eastern end of a large long sea loch coming in from the west. We can go to the next one. This is a view of near the sea end of that long loch. Along the way, we'll pass through some villages which are a little more than both sides of the road, with a few little roads going off from them. One is Pennygale, the next is Benesson. We can go to the next slide, Sharon. This is Benesson. Every time I've been in Benesson, it's been low tide. I've never seen it when it wasn't messy like this. You know the word Benesson. Benesson is the name of the tune you sing when you sing Morning Is Broken. It's named after this town. Finally, we arrive an hour and a half after getting off the big ferry at Finnefort. So we can go to the next one, Sharon, on the west shore of the Ross of Mull. And there we look across the Sound of Iona and we see the small holy Isle of Iona, about 1 mile by 3 miles in size. The ferry trip on the small boat over to Iona takes about 15 minutes. If all of one's transit connections are smooth and nicely dovetailed, the journey from Glasgow to Iona takes about 6 hours. I always feel that I shed layers of stress all along the way. Iona and itself and the time I spend on it, I consider a pilgrimage. More than half of the island's surface is wild, uninhabited, at least in the last several centuries, and it is walkable, although rugged, full of rocky heights and both open and rough depths with serious bogginess existing frequently at any location. I think we can go to the next one, Sharon. This is an air view. So we're at the south end. If you look more towards the top, do you see some green places? They are where there are beautiful fields and where there are sheep. So to your right is the Sound that comes beneath, between Mull and Iona. To your left is the Atlantic. You'll see on the Sound side going all the way up to the top of the island, and then across that central wide portion, that is the beautiful section of green fields and sheep farms and habitation, at least in these times. Up near the top, there is a tall height which you saw called Nunnery, the largest big elevation on the island. And over to the west of it, on your left, you see a pretty brown, rough area on the west. And then most of the bottom half, it's actually more like the bottom 35 to 40% of its length, looks like pretty much like rocky wilderness. The brown is largely a cover of about a foot tall of heather. You see a few green patches right down on the lower right-hand corner. You see a green patch and some white. That white is actually mostly stones. That's the place called Columba's Bay. That's where Columba is said to have landed on the island. It's a trek to get up from the green portion. If you look up on the island on the west, you see a long sandy beach, and that is facing what is called the bay at the back of the ocean. And the large tract of green pasture land inside the beach, and some of that, what looks like beach, is actually stones more than sand. It's a little bit of both. It's called the macher, which is sort of the common pasture which many towns, or island towns anyway, would have and it could be used for pasturing animals. It's also the makeshift golf course on the island. And it's a departure point to rise up onto the heights, coming down over the heights of the south end of the island to then descend down to Columbus Bay. Okay, we can go to the next one. This is what people come to the island to see, the Abbey. Looks pretty nice right now. The MacLeod and the Iona community restored the Abbey. It has had further restorations and significant ones in the last few years, notably to all of the buildings around what would be to your left, around the central courtyard, the cloisters, which we'll see in a minute. And it's up in that section where community offices are, the dining room is, and where quarters are from many of the guests. There is another modern building across the road that houses a lot of their guests and their programs. On the right, as you're facing, you see the entrance to the church itself, the Abbey Church, and there's actually some scaffolding around that. That's sort of normal for Iona and just about any European city you ever go to. Something is under scaffolding all the time. So we can go on to the next one. This is the village. You come in, the ferry would come in just to the left of your picture. You see there's a little bit of beach and you see a nice street, a row of houses. The white one right in the middle is the Argyle Hotel, one of the two little hotels on the island. Okay, the next one. There's a better picture of the village. So you can see several things. On the right, you see something that's pink, and that's getting over near what's called the Bishop's House. We'll have better pictures of that. A big white building you see up on the top in the center right is the Columba Hotel, the other hotel. And that's just a little better view of it. And you see the wonderful ridge, central ridge that backs it. Over on your right is Nunnery, the height. Okay, the next one. This is the Nunnery. As you walk up the hill from the pier at the village, you pass the ruins of the nunnery that went with the Abbey. And it has never been restored. It's been fixed up to look nice in ruin. And there's a way to get a sense of where the rooms and chambers were in it and some explanation of how it was used. And it's a lovely site you're allowed to wander around in it. Okay. All right, looking from the water, we have a close view of the Bishop's House. This is a long, several sectioned building, which is the retreat center for the Episcopal Church of Scotland. They have a chapel in the middle that has a gorgeous chapel, and I do not have a picture of it. I failed to get that. It looks like right beside it, it's not quite that close, is a sort of back view of the Abbey. And you still see the big hill Nunnery behind. Okay, we can go to the next one. A little farther view, you see the full length of the Bishop's House, and you get a much a better picture of Nunnery. You also see above the roof of Bishop's House, you see what is, I think, must be the Iona Community Store, which is a wonderful place to buy some food snacking items. They have free restrooms, very important, and also books and worship materials. It's like a library and bookstore in one. Okay, the next one. All right, this is the cemetery, an important place on Iona, long known to be the burial place for the kings of Scotland, the ancient kings. Everybody says Macbeth is there somewhere. No one knows exactly where, but and of course, that goes right up to the present day. There are graves from this year of islanders who died this year. The first building you see in front there is called the Oren Chapel. Oren was Columba's colleague, said to be the first Christian to die on Iona. We won't talk about how. And behind it, you can see some edges of the Abbey sticking out. As you look past to the water, that is the Sound, looking back towards Mull. You don't see much, it's a cloudy day, so you see the shore of the little island between Iona and Mull at that point. Okay, the next one. This is a closer view of the Oren Chapel, a wonderful place for a handful of people to go in and sing. And you see the Abbey behind it. Okay, the next one. Inside the Abbey, this is a view from the entrance door, facing all the way up to the window behind the altar table. So there is the nave up here, then you go down some steps into the transept and chancel area, and you can see the long built-in typical chancel stalls, of which there are a couple of rows on each side. So it varies as to how full this is, depending on how many people are on the island, either in the programs or in other programs on the island. All of this, even though the Abbey property is now under the maintenance of Historic Scotland, which took a huge expense off of the Iona community, and therefore is a paid entrance tourist site. It is still accessible free of charge for all of the services at the Abbey. Okay, the next one. Here's the site of the cloisters, and this is a full square around. I'm sorry, I don't have a picture of the wonderful statue, sculpture in the middle of the cloisters. The next one. This is the Catholic House of Prayer. It's up on a rise. As you were looking at the island across the Sound from that long picture, it's over more on the left to the south of the village. A wonderful view from its height. These bay windows, one is in the chapel, the other is in a sitting room, looking out over the Sound to Mull. And because Mull has so many peninsulas in it, you're seeing rows of mountains. So several ranges that you see looking out over Mull could appear to be different places, and they're all on the same island. Okay, the next one. Between the village and the Abbey is the Parish Church. This is the Church of Scotland. So that's one more service to add to your schedule on a Sunday. It's usually about 12:30 or 1, so it comes in after the Abbey 10:30 service or the morning prayer services and before any of the evening services. It does not have a resident pastor now. It has a rotating staff. There's some that come in for a weekend to preach. There are a couple of resident clergy on the island, one of them Anglican, and so there's a rotation of preaching as well. This building was designed and built by Thomas Telford, a very, very famous English architect who built lots of bridges and lots of churches and lots of buildings. Next, please. Near the parish church is, well, you can see the parish church behind it, in fact. This is McLean's Cross. Several centuries old. Along a section of road, part of what we see some and we don't see others, near the Abbey, there is a stretch of old road that has been excavated that we can see a stone road. There was a long pilgrimage road, and it was particularly used for all these processions of funerals, when people would come, be brought to the Abbey for the island to be buried. And so this was along that route, and you see the Celtic cross. Okay, a couple of other sites on the island. All right, you remember I talked about the Macher. To your right is part of the bay at the back of the ocean. This is people crossing the Macher, heading down south, and they're about to rise up and go along over the heights that you see at the very left height of the picture. And the next one. We've already gotten down to Columbus Bay, and one of its favorite features for many of us is the labyrinth, homemade with Iona stones. I'll talk more about Iona stones later. All right, the next one. Here's just a random view of a wilderness site. And I can't tell, Bill, whether that's some of the marble quarry stuff or not. But there are sites of many kinds like this around, as well as more gruff ones that are more brown. Okay, I think we have time, Sharon, to do a little bit of the liturgy. So the Iona community has in many ways affected and energized me through its rich liturgies. The rich, thought-provoking, spirit-nudging language of its morning and evening prayer liturgies, along with the rich repertoire of song written, composed, and or arranged by John Bell and his team. And John Bell and I have a link now because we're both sort of godparents to Josh Harvey. And there is a huge store of seasonal and other worship liturgies. I found a pilgrimage liturgy in their 2017 book of services, and I thought it might do us well to sample some of it tonight. So if you can see this, we might read portions of it, not all of it. If we could just look at these opening responses. Why I think it's fun to do this is it puts us in the mindset of pilgrimage. So I'll read the small and you can read the capital letters. The day is coming when things will change. And you say, the day is coming when we will set out. The day is coming to cross the sea, to touch the earth, to plant a seed, to trust and not look back.
To trust and not look back.
The day has come when Christ sets out.
The day has come for food and friendship.
The day has come not to flee, but to embrace, not to escape, but to welcome, not to shut out, but in safety and in community, to trust and not look back.
To trust and not look back.
And then there would be all kinds of stuff in the middle, including in this service, a chance for the group or subgroups to meet and actually talk about some details and some specific things they hope to accomplish. And anyway, some of the last words are good as well. So could we read together the one at the top in the bold print? See how well we do with this back and forth. I may stop speaking after you all speak because you'll probably be together more than I am. I don't know. Zoom is always fun. Downtrodden Christ, as we set out,
sandals,
boots,
and trainers,
on wheels,
on wheels,
and be our leader,
and our guide,
our back
marker and our patience with each other, each creature, with ourselves,
with God's
good intent all around us, on our way.
Amen.
Amen.
I had wonderful songs, but I don't want to take the time. I want to make sure we get through the rest and have some time to talk. I'll just read this and you can follow along. Journeying with you, Creator God, is to journey in your world, full of marvels and such beauty, to glimpse eternity in sky and sea, to feel the earth and rock beneath my feet. Journeying with you, brother Jesus, is to journey with your friends, to meet and travel a while together, then part at the crossroads, knowing you are with us all. Journeying with you, Holy Spirit, is to journey with the wind, to move to your wild music, then try to sing your song so others may hear. Thank you. Okay, we can go back to our other thing. So Sharon, we can go on to the next slide, which is the portrait of Kenneth. Tied in with my Iona experiences for years has been a man named Kenneth Stephen, who is one of Scotland's most admired poets, and in my view, a treasure to the English-speaking world. I first became aware of him through his book entitled Iona Poems, published in the year 2000, which I discovered in my early Iona years at the Iona store. His writing is eloquent, musical, profound. In October of 2014, arriving for a stay at the Catholic House of Prayer, I learned that Kenneth Stephen was on the island leading a writer's retreat at one of the hotels, and would hold a reading of some of his work one evening, to which we at the Catholic House were invited. I went with some trepidation. You see, you know how it is when you get wonderful words of a poet in your head, and you get the chance to hear the poet, and sometimes his voice is like this. Well, I didn't have that experience with Kenneth. He has a wonderful, eloquent, elegant, musical voice, which conveys the magic of his soul and his spirit and his genius. Kenneth read that October night from his new epic poem, new at that time, called A Song Among the Stones, reimagining an event asserted and perhaps documented by historians and anthropologists, a sea voyage by a few men in a coracle, that's a small round wicker boat, traveling the waters from perhaps Iona all the way to the outer islands of Iceland. Kenneth was inspired by this story after hearing historians and anthropologists lecture on the traces of this. It is a work about pilgrimage. Kenneth himself is a pilgrim, Scotsman born in Glasgow, growing up in the lovely village of Aberfeldy on Loch Tay in Perthshire, educated at the University of Glasgow, teacher for a time in Norway, poet, novelist, writer of children's books. He and his photographer wife, Christina Hayward, live on the tiny Isle of Seal, just south of Oban off the west coast of Scotland, where they quarry slate. Kenneth Stephen grew up as the son of parents who loved Scotland, and particularly its islands, spending as much time on them as they could manage. Iona was one of their favorites. Kenneth's sister, who died tragically young, worked as part of the resident staff of the Iona community on the island. The next slide. Okay, so this is Kenneth's new book, published last fall by Paraclete Press in Massachusetts. So it's an American book now. His new book of Iona poems. It includes, I think, just about everything from that first book, the one that's out of print, plus a whole bunch of new stuff. And I'm going to select from it. The next one, please. This just as a reference, this is the white one, is the white and the gray just to the right of it, where you see sort of blue trim. It looks blue. That's the Argyle Hotel, one of the two small hotels there, both of which have lavish gardens and raise all of their vegetables and a lot of their fruit. So when you go on retreat to this place, it's a gourmet experience as well. That's where I joined Kenneth in 2017. Kenneth and his wife, Christina Hayward, who is a fine photographer, and about a dozen other interesting people. They were teachers or medical doctors evolved into poets or harpists for a week's retreat on Iona, exploring Celtic spirituality and staying in the Argyle Hotel at the village. I've done that. I did that again in 2018 and again in 2021 with my colleague Sarah Hill from our community. Can you back up one? No, the other way. Is that possible? Yeah, this is the new book. I wanted you to just look at the cover. That photograph is by Christina, Kenneth's wife. And it's even more striking in person than it is in the online reproduction. Okay, we can go forward to now. So I'd like to just read you a few of Kenneth's poems, which capture for me the spirit of pilgrimage and of the reverence that he and I hold for this place and the holiness we feel in it. This is called Place. And God said, "Let there be a place made of stone out off the west of the world, roughed 9 months by a gale, rattled in Atlantic swell. A place that rouses each Easter with soft blessings of flowers and shocks of white shell sand. A place found only sometimes by those who have lost their way." And next. So this is down at Columba's Bay, and these are some of the profuse stones that you see there. One of Iona's loveliest treasures is its abundance of stones. The island's geological history is remarkable, and there are at present a huge variety of different rock strains, many appearing not at all on neighboring Mull and other West Coast and island sites. Few visitors leave without a few stones in their pockets or luggage. I bring them back to the children who sing with me in the church choir. The seaside at Columba's Bay and at the bay of the back of the ocean is covered with stones. This poem is called "The Thin Place." People have come here for centuries to rearrange the stones, to make sense of the silence they cannot catch and keep for the journey back. They find here something of all they are missing in the real world that is somehow not real anymore. They wish they had come here before, sooner, to see it over there on the edge of the sky, where a late sun is blessing the sea. And the next one. Here's an artist's portrait of St. Columba. And we can go on to the next one. One of Kenneth's poems tells the story of Columba's death, when his horse understood, although the humans around did not, that its master's death was imminent. And Kenneth has written a poem called "The Death of Columba." It was another day. The bell echoed. A coracle came with news of Ireland and a fine cut of meat. The sea wrapped round the island like a mantle of silk. Everything he did, as always, just a beat slower. They saw nothing. The talk was generous, the laughter easy as a lark spun songs somewhere out of sky that still morning. Yet the horse came. In the middle of it all, and the faces turned like full moons as that long head rested on his shoulder, and the nostrils full of hay flared. For the horse had heard dark in the drumbeat of his heart, that edge of death, and wept softly against the old man's head. Salt tears like the water that had brought him once out of the heart of Ireland, that would take him now over a last sea into the land he had lived. And the next one. One of the most celebrated of the illustrated manuscripts, the 8th century book of Kells was created on Iona and is assumed to have been used on the altar in the Abbey. The manuscript was removed to Ireland, where it was kept and used in the Abbey of Kells until it was moved for safekeeping in Dublin in 1653. The reason it was moved off Iona was Vikings, raids, destruction. Kenneth has written a poem entitled The Illuminated Manuscript. And it's his imagining of the situation. They brought me here from Ireland, still a boy, to begin their book. I remember the day I left, soft bread, a silvering of geese, the sound of my mother. Now I slip the stone of these steps every day, long before dawn, breathe the dark and hear the whelming of the winds about this fastness before my one candle like a petal of gorse flutters the shadows in ghosts over the cold wall. Out of the thin window I watch the sea all winter heave and drag like a dying man, the skies blackened and bruised. Some days there is nothing in the pen except my own emptiness. I hold it hoping until the stars blow out from the attic of the skies and a ledge of moon lifts across the hills. Just sometimes something breaks inside like the brittle lid of a casket and pours out light onto the waiting page. And the next one. This is the descent from the height down to Columbus Bay. What you see that looks like beach is actually stones. And that labyrinth is off. You can't quite see it. There's one more descent of green over on what would be your left before the rocks and the sea. This poem imagines the story of visitors, pilgrims to the island. So this is the sight you have when you're rewarded with this. You've made the long trek across the Macher and up and across the massive high elevation of the south end through a very difficult rocky section known as the Khyber Pass. And you're rewarded as you reach the end of the height and descend into the rich green grass approaching the bay. This poem is called Island. We came to the island reluctant, dragged our feet up over the gravel. 3 nights we remained in the monastery's rattling emptiness, our heads shorn cold, ears echoing song. The wind came like scurrying creatures gnawing at fingers and feet. Milk blue moonlight filled the cloisters. We prayed, and at first our prayers were ragged things, torn thoughts that blew into the fierce dark. Then in the waking pain of the second night, something broke the jar of my heart. A softness flowed I had not known before. On the third day I walked to the south end, met the sea leaping in fierce dogs. My hand felt skiffed like flints. But not only my hands. I came back from the island, all of us came back, glass vessels, see-through, clear. And the next one. A fascinating sight is the foundation remains of an ancient hermit's cell, a small, no doubt cramped hut hidden away in a remote spot on the backside of Dunny, the height. Curiously, this special place on everyone's to-do or to-find list is remarkably difficult to find. Even longtime residents and guides can easily lose their bearings and retrace and redirect their steps, sometimes without success. This poem is called The Hermit's Cell. I had to listen for a silence that was born inside. It took a whole year to find, and now it does not fail. I need nothing. All I want is where I am. I used to pray, and praying then was struggle with myself. Now I am made prayer, am hollowed out, a song that needs no sound. I pick the blow of flowers, bring them back in blues and reds and golds. And in the slow of winter dark, I watch for dawn and know that I am growing into light a little every day. And the next one. A quick moment for comic relief with one of Kenneth Stevens' most famous and beloved poems. A trip to Iona is validated by the sighting of an otter. If not around Martyrs Bay, south of the village on the sound side, at least somewhere on the shore of the long sea loch one follows for the west portion of the journey across the Ross of Mull. This is called The Small Giant. The otter is 90% water, 10% God. This is a mastery we have not fathomed in a million years. I saw one once off the teeth of Western Scotland, playing games with the Atlantic. 3 feet of gymnastics, taking on an ocean. And the next. It is worth the almost 2-mile walk from the village to the Macher, often into a strong wind, to reach the west coast and the spectacular bay at the back of the ocean. Just before the gate opening into the broad pasture, also serving as golf course, which is the open field of the Macher, is the new residence of Lindsay and Joyce, who own and operate the Iona taxi service, which does a good business since only residents are allowed to drive vehicles onto the island. The upper floor of their new house is a bed and breakfast with floor to ceiling full windows facing the sea. I spent one night there, checking that off my bucket list, at least for the first time. This poem is called The Bay at the Back of the Ocean. I come back here brittle and broken, to be washed up new and rinsed and clean, with eyes that no longer see the clutter of what needs to be done. To be made pure west again on days the sea's moiling and searching, roaring over beaches and chariots beneath the battlefield of the skies. Then when the light comes, sometimes shimmering like a whole shoal of herring, and the wind stands still, I think, this is to fill the heart. And the next one. This is a picture at the north end of the island, which has sandy beaches. What you see over there is some of Mull. Just a few months before my first arrival on Iona in 1999, 4 of the island's most important and cherished young men were drowned in a freak boating accident. What could have killed the island turned into hope as the families of the dead managed to find young men and women with families to take their place in the essential sheep farms and other businesses, laying the groundwork for growing a full new generation of island leaders. Kenneth Stephen's family spent significant time on Iona during his childhood summers. This poem is called Logi. When I was a boy, I went every Saturday to the north end of the island to her farmhouse for eggs. I walked against the wind that was full of snowflakes, the salt knife of the sea. When I got to her doorway, the collies flowed out at me, black and white bounces of barking. She brought me into her home and gave me 6 eggs in a box to take back for the coming week. Last night, her son was drowned, returning in a boat at midnight. He was lost and will not come home. I am older and have been far away in different corners of the world. I have seen all that I expected. But now I am returning to the island. I am going to the north end to that woman who once gave me eggs. And when I get there and the collies come round me, and I stand in the kitchen and see her, a whole ocean will drown me. And the next one. So I've given you a glimpse of Iona, which has become my Iona, a place of eternal pilgrimage, the place of my eternal pilgrimage. It draws me to its wild, clean, out of the busy world, natural paradise. It feeds my soul with a richness of worship and prayer opportunities in the company of other pilgrims from all manner of places around the globe. And in its hardy, determined, strong-willed, but ever so kind and caring resident population, it lives the ideal of beloved community. And the last one, Sharon. I'll finish with another of Kenneth's most memorable poems, entitled Iona. Is this place really nearer to God? Is the wall thin between our whispers and his listening? I only know the world grows less and less. Here, what matters is conquering the wind, coming home dry shod, getting the fire lit. I am not sure whether there is no time here or more time, whether the light is stronger or just easier to see. That is why I keep returning, thirsty, to this place that is older than my understanding, younger than my broken spirit. Thank you.
That was lovely.
That was wonderful, Bill.
Thank you. I wish I could take each of you.
Love to go.
One of these days.
Is there a sign-up sheet?
The problem is accommodations. Now that the world is returning, I'm not sure if I contacted the Catholic House, I could get a booking at all this summer. I don't know. I may find out.
Bill, did you mention that Iona is a dry island? That might affect people's plans.
Well, what do you mean?
There's no alcohol allowed on the island.
Are you sure?
Well, that was the rule when I went there, but maybe Maybe
When-
it's changed.
When did you go?
I went in, I think it was back in the early 70s.
It's changed.
You can believe it.
It's changed. They built a restaurant, which the locals called the Bar.
And they serve alcohol now?
Apparently, I have not been in it. Bill Klein, who was with us, spent his year of discernment on the island working for the community. And his story to me was that if they wanted a beer, they would have to take the ferry over to Benesson.
That was what I thought.
And that has changed.
I see.
I think there's only really the one restaurant of that sort. And I don't know whether in fact you go in and there is a bar or not. So there is at least, oh, well, I do know. I've stayed at these retreats at the Argyle Hotel, and yes, there is. Yes, there is.
Well, it's been made safe for Episcopalians.
Yeah. Well, my blood thinner does not allow for much of that these days. So, but anyway.
What I found interesting, Bill, was all those stones and the variation in apparently the composition.
Well,
And I think Mull, correct me if I'm wrong on the geology, but I think Mull is essentially flat-lying, totally different from
Mull
Iona.
has huge, various kinds of mountains and ranges of mountains and cliffs. It has many kinds. Apparently, there was a huge volcano in that whole area where Mull is.
Mm-hmm.
And so that whole island and much of the land around it is the result of a huge eruption at some time. I've also heard that at some billions of years ago time, that the east coast of Scotland a piece of it rolled over to the west, and some of that rock is what goes right through Iona, but not through Mull, and I don't begin to understand that. I can look at all these books that show all these different traces and strains of different colors of rock and all that, and it means nothing. What I'm hoping to do is to corral one of my geologist friends like Elizabeth Knapp and to go with me. But I haven't managed to do that yet.
Well, I think Jay's a geologist. He'd love to go with you, right, Jay?
Yeah, I'd love to go. But I remember, in fact, you showed Mull from a distance, and you could see these rounded, flat, I believe they were basalt beds, but I couldn't tell from the distance, which is volcanic in origin.
Yeah, on the west, as you look at it, it has these huge sort of peninsulas that come way out like huge fingerless wrists. And then the sea locks go way in, the sea locks and the bays. So there are, in between each wave of the water or intrusion of the water, there is another kind of ridge. But also at the end of the sea locks, it's flat and boggy and full of maybe some of those beds that you're describing. A very, extremely varied landscape.
I went, I'd take my geologic hammer, I think, to poke
good.
around.
Sounds good. Well, the quantity of these stones is so constant on the shores. Those two, the Columbus Bay and the bay at the back of the ocean, and these are rocks that will range from the size of a big, long, elongated melon down to the tiniest fingerprint of pebbles. And so I've reached the point where I have representative samples of most of the distinctive types. So I'm always looking for something different, something a little new, where maybe there's some cross fusion of a couple of types that manage to get into one stone. Kenneth Stephen is rabid about something that's called serpentine, which is almost a crystal-like, clear, glassy green stone. And he has very, very little use for anything else. I'm not that particular. I just sort of like what I like, and then manage to gather enough small ones to keep my store supplied here to give out to the children. And I've got a young friend I need to update who's an adolescent here who loves rocks. And I keep saying, boy, do I have something for you. And, and I often have one in my pocket, and I have two, one on each side of the keyboard of the organ where I play.
Bill, if people keep taking the stones, how do they replenish themselves?
The sea has an endless supply.
Uh-huh.
And, you know, the most I have taken would probably be this many at a time. I have to be careful. The scanning machines don't quite understand them, and they can hold you up. I almost missed a plane in October because of stone. So
Bill, thank you so much.
well, thank you. It's been
Definitely
a pleasure
enjoyed
to
it.
share this with you.
Thank you. And next week we will have Tuck Bauerfein talking about the Holy Land.
All right.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.